Hey everyone, welcome to Group Text. I mean, seriously, I adore today's guest who is never afraid to look at someone and say, that pattern is not doing you any favors. Tan France is one of the Queer Eye's Fab Five, the host of Next in Fashion, and the author of the New York Times best-selling memoir, Naturally Tan, which I get is better than self-tanner. Anyway, but he is also the producer and host of the Fuse documentary Beauty and the Bleach, which aims to take down the global beauty trend of skin lightening. It premieres March 1st at 9 p.m. on Fuse and Fuse Plus. Please welcome to Group Text, Tan France. Hi.
Hi, Melissa. Hi, sweetheart. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So I want to talk about Beauty and the Bleach, but then I realized I actually know very little about you pre-Queer Eye. Now,
Yeah,
feel free to correct me. You are of Pakistani descent. Your parents owned a clothing manufacturing business in England. I mean,
grandparents.
what? Your
My
grandparents.
grandparents. Yeah.
I mean, I have this vision of you crawling around on the floor, looking at the items and deciding which ones just need to go immediately to the outlet.
That's basically it. I started out so young with such an opinion on what I thought was cute and not cute. And it just never went away. And then as I got older, I just thought, well, other people need to hear this. And so I just continued on giving my own unsolicited opinion. But yeah, I always loved clothes from a very young age, and I always understood the power of clothes.
It's interesting, yeah, because we all talk about always clothes can make a statement, but we'll get to that. What was actually interesting to you as a kid? Was it because I think about kids like to build things and they like, Legos and this, and I would think because they really worked in manufacturing, was it originally about putting edges together? What was it as a kid that
You
the
know,
physical part that interested you?
so much. I just thought it was fascinating. I mean, I had this really unique insight into garment making. And I mean, I know that many people in other countries, usually third world countries, will have access to that. However, in the West, we don't. I don't know any kid in school, my school, that ever understood how the things that they were wearing were pieced together. And at the factory, I started going there when I was probably 7 or 8. And I remember distinctly thinking, gosh, I just assumed that this grew on trees. I had no idea that it took this whole group of people who were so highly skilled. And I understood just how important it was that they only focused on one thing so they could get so many things done within a day. So you could produce hundreds and hundreds of garments. I just found it so fascinating. And you're right, when other people were playing with Legos, I was figuring out how do you construct this part of a garment so that by the time it's done, it is something that you could wear that you feel beautiful in. And so that was what was most fascinating to me. It wasn't just that this looks nice, that looks nice. It's what will this fabric do when you lay that on someone's body? How will this fabric sew in comparison to that fabric? What will this thread do to that? It's stuff that anyone else would probably find so dull. But as a kid, for me, I thought it was life changing. It was life changing. It clearly has been life changing.
And this just popped in my head because this just reminded me you're saying about fabrics and feel and the way things lay. Did you like have a blanket or a stuffed animal as a kid? Because it sounds like you were started out by being very tactile.
Yeah. Do you know what? I would love to say I did. My parents were so not those parents. However, I'm now a parent and I forced a blanket on my child that now he cannot live without, he cannot sleep without. But no, I didn't have any of those things. However, I do remember the fabrics that my mum wore, and they were South Asian clothes, and I always thought they were the most beautiful. And they're the kind of things that I'm inspired by now.
It's always so interesting how that gets in your DNA
Oh
mentally.
yeah. Oh
So
yeah.
I heard you designed your first garment at 13. Now feel free to let me know if I'm wrong. And it was a bedazzled denim coat.
It so actually I designed it in my head probably years before. And it was a bedazzled gilet.
Oh,
So it was,
Jesus.
yes.
Explain to people what that
So
is.
it's in America you'd call it a vest,
Yes.
but it was basically a jacket without sleeves. And I'd wanted to make it for years, but even before then. So I wrote my book, as you mentioned, Natalie Tan. I wrote years ago. This isn't a plug for it. It was done years ago. I'm not interested in sales anymore. However, I loved writing it because I got to really explore what I was like as a child. I didn't ever think to ask my mom what I was like as a kid. I think I remember what I remember, and that's that. But I spoke to my mom, my siblings, when I was writing the book, saying, "Tell me everything you can remember from me before I remember." And my mom said that from a really young age, she thinks it was probably around about 5 or 6, I used to ask for something to be made. So in my mind, I designed this piece of clothing, which was a black silk shirt with gold buttons. I don't know why that was the thing I desperately wanted, but from a very young age, I asked for that every holiday, whether it was a birthday, our version of Christmas. And I don't know who I thought my family were, that I thought that they were getting clothes made because we were broke. There's no way my mom had a tailor on hand who was going to have her clothes made. But yeah, I asked for it for a very, very long time. So I started designing very early on.
And do you remember the feeling of accomplishment when you finished that first piece that you had designed in
Yeah,
your mind so long ago?
yeah, I do. It was difficult to get there because I had only ever known certain parts of a garment because that's how a factory works. But I'd spent years and years learning what everyone did. And so by the time I got to 12, 13, I knew how to make a garment pretty well. And so at that point, I was like, okay, now's the time. I've learned all I can. And so, yeah, it felt like a real sense of accomplishment. And then at that point, there was no stopping me. I made clothes for my siblings. I made clothes for my mom. Yeah, I felt amazing being able to create something. I've always been a person who wanted to create something.
Did you ever get that black shirt with the gold buttons?
You know, I didn't. And my sister had said when she read my book, she was like, go get it. Like, you may never wear it, but go have it made. And every time somebody suggests that, I'm like, oh, yeah, why don't I? At some point, I will get it made.
I mean, I have a black shirt with gold buttons.
I'm sure. I'm sure. I mean,
I feel like I
sure.
should send it to you.
I was going to say, I'm sure Versace has a bunch of them. I
Yes.
must have seen it on some kind of Versace moment in a magazine and thought, oh, that's me. And if that didn't give it away to my family that I was clearly homosexual, I don't know what would have.
You studied fashion in college, and then you worked as a designer and a director at Zara and Selfridges. Where did, because there is a difference between designing and styling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where did you make that transition?
Well, so for a very long time, including big stores, I was styling also. I was doing windows. I was deciding what mannequins should look like in a store. So I wasn't doing it for people, but I was technically doing it for people. I just wasn't giving one person that makeover. I was hopefully inspiring many people by the windows I was creating or the mannequins I was creating in stores to say, look, when you go in a store, I know it's really intimidating to speak to a store representative, copy the mannequin. And so styling, it felt like a really natural extension. It's funny, I'm sure you know this as well as anyone, most designers don't style their own collections. Usually they'll bring in a stylist who has a vision that the stylist sometimes is too close to. They can't style their own product. And so they bring in a stylist. However, for me, I love both equally, and I didn't ever feel like I was too close to my own designs to be able to understand how it should be styled. And so I I wanted both facets of fashion, and I'm so glad that I worked so hard to get both of those. And for me, one doesn't live without the other.
No, and what people I think don't realize is, especially when you see these women on the red carpet and this, the ones that always look the best, whether you like all the elements separately, are the ones that have a complete look, that it's
Absolutely.
finished.
Yeah, absolutely. And it usually is not the designer who decided to put that look together because many people don't realize this, but when you see someone on that red carpet, that brand has said, let's say for example, it's Versace, they've said, yes, you can borrow that dress, but if you want to borrow that dress, we need you to have the head to toe look. We need you to have the shoes with it, the bag with it, whatever. And that is usually a look that was put together by a stylist for Versace.
Well, exactly. It's I was just laughing about dressing mannequins. It must be so much easier. I think about my stylist, thinking how much easier that must be than having to watch me complain and this is too tight and I can't breathe and this is uncomfortable. He used to say to me, I'd be like, I can't breathe. And he used to say to me, that's not my problem.
Legitimately, that's exactly what I think. So every now and then I'm like, you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
You'll figure it out. Breathe later. You look great.
You look great. I'm not that interested that you can't breathe. Whatever.
Make it work.
You moved to New York in 2008 to work in fashion and then to Salt Lake City. Now, this is not a normal trajectory.
No.
In the fashion world.
No.
How do you go from the garment district to the seat of Mormonism in a leap? I want to call your therapist and say, what was wrong? What happened?
Well, first off, Melissa, I don't have a therapist. I'm very English. And that means my family's my therapist. However, when it comes to
then we need to call them to find out.
I know.
That is not a straight line.
Though, for me, it was perfect and I've never looked back. And I know that there were probably many opportunities in fashion that were missed because I didn't stay in New York. I wanted love more. And I know that sounds so, and especially in today's age, like who cares? But I'm sure most people think, who cares? Career's the most important. Yeah, career was fine for me. I just wanted to fall in love. I wanted to be with a person that I thought was better than anybody I'd ever met. And I'd had shitty relationship after shitty relationship. And I was just sick of having my heart broken. And then on a trip to Salt Lake, I met somebody, fell in love almost instantly. And that person is still my husband today. And I truly am still so happy with him. He makes me so happy. And so as far as career goes, yeah, maybe going to Salt Lake wasn't the best idea. But as far as real life goes, it was the best thing I ever did. And that's how I see everything that I do for work. I just think that's not my real life. Even now, I love the job that I have and I'm so grateful for it, but it's just my job. I have a very real life outside of that job that I do. And yeah, that's still the most important thing to me. And so I wouldn't give up Salt Lake for anything.
So love brought you to Salt Lake.
Yeah. Not initially. Actually, lust brought me to Salt Lake initially, if I'm really honest.
Yeah, no.
When
be
I
honest,
first started to come, when I first started to come to Salt Lake, it was because I thought the boys were so hot, and they really were. And I'd very recently come over from England, and English boys don't look like Utah boys. They don't look like American boys, but they definitely don't look like Utah boys. The Utah boys were very put together, very, very groomed. That's probably the Mormon thing. And so they're very clean cut, but muscles galore. And I was like, oh, this is so nice. And so my first trip here, I was like, there are men that live like this. That's insane. And then they also didn't drink, and I'm Muslim and I don't drink. And so both of those things were like, I couldn't ask for anything better. And so I kept coming back over and over again. And then on one of my trips is when I met my husband, decided, okay, I'm going to move here completely.
But how did you even discover this about Salt Lake boys? I mean, you were going between London and New York.
Yeah, but my housemate in New York was from Utah. I'd never heard the word Utah. I had never heard the word Mormon. I didn't know what either of those things were. And so when he said, you want to come to Utah, I was like, yeah, sure. I mean, it's a few hours to get there, but I've never seen anywhere else in America. Why not? And so have you ever been to Utah? Have you been to Salt Lake?
Yes.
It's so pretty. Like it
really it's so pretty.
Oh my gosh, the first time I got off the flight and looked around, I was like, there are mountains everywhere. This is magical. And then when you throw onto the pile hot boys, God, that's a winning combination.
And it's very clean.
Very clean. Crime rate's real low. It's just, God, there's so much to it. And here's the thing, to be very honest, I leave really regularly. Like, it's lovely to have this as my base, but I'm not here more than like a week and a half, 2 weeks a month. The rest of the time, I'm gallivanting to New York or California. So this is a great base.
Oh, it's a fantastic base. So you got there and you saw this very niche market
Yeah,
of fashionable clothes that still eh, complied to all the rules of Mormonism.
yeah, modest
Now,
clothing.
did you think to yourself, "Ooh, this is an opportunity, like in a financial opportunity. I can corner the market on this"? Or what inspired you to even do that? Did you have great girlfriends that needed something to wear?
Yeah, yeah. So I was, so I just moved to Utah. My visa was about to expire. I was on a tourist visa, and I really wanted to stay. I'd fallen madly in love with Rob, and so I really wanted to stay. There's obviously nothing in fashion in Utah, like no major brand in Utah, but there was this modest clothing company that made modest clothing for Mormon women. And so my friend, funnily enough, my husband's best friend at the time, who's now our best friend, worked for this modest clothing company and said, "I'm sure if you came to the office and belched, they would give you a job. There's nobody in town that really does what you do, so you can do whatever you want." And so I went and met the owner, and weirdly, rightly so. By the time the interview ended, she was like, "What job do you want here? You can have whatever job you want." And so I ended up working there. I was there for 2 years, perfectly happy. The style of clothing that they were making was okay. It was just really plain. It was basically Gap
Boring.
15
Yeah,
years ago. Yeah,
boring.
yeah. Really, really, really safe. But it served a purpose. And then the company was being sold. And so I asked the owner, who I was good friends with, if she would mind if I created my version of it. It seems that she was selling hers. And so I wanted to create a fashionable version of modest clothing, a company that we had never really seen before in Utah and definitely not in Mormon culture. And so I started a brand that was basically just London style clothes or English style clothes that just so happened to cover Mormon bodies. Um, and I was shocked that it did so well. The first 2 years were really, really, really tough, but after the first 2 years, it sold like gangbusters. I could not believe it, and it wasn't that I ever set out to create a really successful, financially successful brand. I just wanted to create clothes that I thought were hot and dress the girls around me. I never thought that it was going to become what it became, and within 2 or 3 years, it became really, really great that I started creating other companies based off the back of that, which were all modest clothing companies.
That you found a good sweet spot in the market.
Yeah,
But I do have to ask, because you were raised Muslim, even though you're not very religious, and then you moved to Salt Lake. Neither group is really openly accepting of gay people. I was going
yeah,
to say gay men, but it's across the board. Um, you and the gays and the Jews, not super popular in those two demographics. How did you even get through it as a child, but also then living in a different type of environment, but with the same, uh,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
biases?
Um, you know, being in Utah as a Muslim gay man isn't that different from how I always lived. So the Utah component is a moot point for me. Um, when I was a kid, I always knew that I was gay. I didn't know anything else. And so there was no way to reconcile anything other than I believe in my religion. I was raised in my religion and I truly believe my religion. And I also 100% understand that I'm gay and there's no changing that. And so for a long time, I thought, okay, eventually I'm going to be expected to marry, and I'm not going to marry a woman. I don't want to ruin someone's life by getting an arranged marriage, which is very typical in my culture.
Mm-hmm.
And then the woman finding out potentially weeks, months, years down the line that I'm not physically attracted to her, sexually attracted to her in any way. And so I honestly thought for the longest time, I probably won't live past 25. 25 is usually at the age where we get married. And after 25, it gets very difficult to get married. This was for my community back in the day. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to live life as fully as I can. And then who knows what will happen? I will either run away, or if I can't find a way to run away to another country, I will probably commit suicide. That was just, I was so matter of fact about it because I'd never seen a queer Muslim before, ever.
Wait, what did you call yourself?
A queer Muslim, sorry.
Oh, I thought
Muslim.
you said it. I thought you had, it was you had condensed
No,
the
no,
two
no,
words.
no. I wish I had come up with something funnier, but no.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I was like J-Lo, like something.
No. And so yeah, I'd never seen a queer Muslim on TV or in movies. No, actually, no people of color really who are queer. And so I just thought, oh, we just don't exist. We either hide away or we die. They're the only options. And thankfully, by the time I got to that age, 24, 25, I thought, no, fuck it. I've got nothing to hide, and I don't care if nobody else came before me. Yes, I moved away to America, but I wasn't necessarily running away. I just wanted a better life. And so, yeah, that's I don't know if I ever reconciled it. It was just matter of fact for me. I just wasn't willing to let my community, family, anyone say that I wasn't allowed to live and be happy just because I was gay. And I wasn't going to let anyone say I couldn't be Muslim just because I'm gay. I love both parts equally.
Right. And then moving to Salt Lake, you're moving to the seat of Mormonism.
Yeah.
Which is also a very sexually restrictive
However,
religion.
Because I'm an outsider, I don't think they really care what outsiders do. And if anything, because I'm brown and I'm British, they even before Queer Eye, I was here 9 years before Queer Eye. I was treated so nicely because I was just this exotic person in town. Utah, when I first moved here 15 years ago, was the whitest place I've ever seen in my life. And so there was this person bouncing around town who was way too overly confident and and had this very strong English accent and gorgeous brown skin. And therefore, nobody ever said anything. And here's the thing about Utah, especially the Mormon community and culture. If they think something of you, you would never know it. They may say it behind your back, but they're not going to say it to your face. Like politeness and manners are very, very important. And so I've truly never experienced any kind of discrimination here.
That's amazing.
And I will say there is a massive queer community. And so I think that they realize that the community is just not going anywhere.
Right. Well, and soon you'll be allowed to buy alcohol on Sundays. Who knew? Netflix decides to do a reboot of Queer Eye. How did they find you?
Okay. In a couple of weird ways. So one of the businesses that I created, this is a long-winded story, so I'm going to try and
give you I'm loving this. So go right ahead. I feel like I should just get a sandwich and curl up and listen.
Yeah. So one of the businesses that I owned was with a blogger at the time, influencer, and she was a really popular influencer. And she wanted to create a brand. She always supported one of my brands. And then when she was creating her own brand, she said, would you like to be a partner of mine? I don't know how to create a brand. You do. Can we do this together? Yeah, sure. We're already friends. Yep, sure. And then this manager from LA reached out to say, hey, there's this girl that's your colleague who has a bunch of sisters and on social media, they're really interesting to watch. Would she ever be interested in doing the show? So they were considering doing the show. The networks were saying, this is way too white, 4 white girls in very white Utah. It's never going to fly. This was 2016-ish, 17 actually. And they were like, no, 16. It's never going to fly. We need people of color also. And so the manager was like, would you ever be interested in being on? I was like, I'll be in the background. People will know me as her business partner, but that's it. I've no desire. I'm a very busy businessman. Okay, fine. Good enough. As long as there's color somewhere. We met with a bunch of networks. We flew out to LA, and there was a sizzle reel done. Went to LA, met with E, Bravo, every network, every damn network we'd meet. We had 3 days that were packed full of meetings. And one of those meetings was at Bravo. And the woman at Bravo sat around the table watching the sizzle, chatting to all of us. And I said only a few things because it wasn't my show. I was purely there to add spice, literal spice. And partway through the meeting, she said, "Look, ladies, you are so nice. I don't want to destroy your family with a reality TV show. You're way too sweet for that. You, young man, I like a lot." And I was like, "Oh, thanks." She was like, "Queer Muslim man who's an immigrant and who is British and has a lot to say," but I was always very opinionated. She was like, "There's something we can do with you." I was like, "Oh, no, thank you so much. I'm not interested. But thanks for being so kind." So we left. And then a few weeks later, this manager got in touch again and said Netflix is looking for somebody to be the fashion guy on Queer Eye. They've auditioned a bunch of people, and the person who was the head of unscripted at Netflix is still the head of unscripted at Netflix. She used to work at Bravo, and her boss at Bravo called her after the meeting saying, "I've met somebody today who should be on your show." And it just took her a while to figure out who it was and how to get to me. And the rest is history. The rest is not history. I said no. I had no interest. And then a few conversations later, I said, "Okay, I'll have the audition."
What did your husband think?
He was the one who said I should do it. I was the one who
Really?
said absolutely not. Yeah, so I had talked to him about how shitty it felt to not ever have queer brown people on TV. I was like, yeah, it's all a bunch of white folks, and even they're not. We don't really get their real stories, but especially with brown folks, even non-queer brown folks, straight brown folks. I was like, there are no stories about us in the West at all. And in England, we're the largest minority group. South Asians are the largest minority group in the UK. You will never see us on primetime TV. That's not where we're allowed. And so I used to moan about that to him, saying, "This is bullshit. Like, we're fun, we're entertaining. Our people are loud. We know how to entertain." And so he said, "Look, I know you don't want to do the show because, first off, you're not interested, you've got a business. Secondly, I was really worried that I would destroy my entire family, my entire community. I was gay, but I was in America. Nobody needed to know. And if I'd done this show and this show were to be successful, everyone would know. And that could really have some really intense consequences for my family and my friends back home. And so I didn't want that kind of pressure. And my husband was the one who was really adamant, saying, "You have gone on about this for a long time. You might get to be the person who changes things for your community. You might get to be the person that kids look up to, saying, if Tam France can do it, why can't I do it?" And so that's why I took the call.
You know, it's interesting. You talk about being a leader in breaking a barrier, and that, which makes me jump ahead now to Beauty and the Bleach, which I don't think people realize what a big trend, unfortunately, I hate using the word trend, this is. Will you explain to people sort of in a little bit more in depth on this whole horrible phenomenon and how why you decided to produce a documentary about it?
Yeah. The best way to articulate this is I need to explain the difference between racism and colorism first. So the documentary is about colorism. The racism is what one experiences from people outside your own race. Colorism is something you experience from people within your own race. It can also be from people outside your own race, but mostly from people within your own race. And the suggestion is that you might be too dark to achieve something, success in general. And so a lot of people who experience colorism, almost every brown person you will ever meet or black person you will ever meet has experienced some form of colorism. You will see this every day, and you may never have noticed. I'm sure you have, but you see the likes of Beyonce. She's gorgeous. She's fair-skinned. Her dad made a comment in the press a long time ago saying, if Beyonce wasn't fair-skinned, she wouldn't have gotten to the levels she's gotten to. You can't argue with that point. You can't, especially not back in the day. And she came up 25 years ago. And that is the case for every person of color. If you are seen as dark-skinned, if you are dark-skinned, you are seen as less likely to achieve certain levels of success. If you are fairer skinned,
within your own community.
within your own community, yes. And if you're light skinned, you are seen as more desirable and therefore will achieve success. And that was the case in my community too. And so people go to great lengths, and those great lengths usually include bleaching your skin to try and become fair like those other people in your community. And because those products are often quite expensive, people resort to black market treatments. And so I felt the pressure from such a young age. I was slightly darker than I am now, and in my community, that was dark. And so, from the earliest memories, I remember in conversation. Well, this person just had a baby. The only question is how fair are they? Are they fair? This person's getting married. How fair is the bride? That was always the question. And so, when you hear that practically every day, you realize that there's such great value held in the color of your skin. And so by the time I got to 9 years old, I started bleaching my skin.
Really?
And I couldn't afford it, so I stole my cousin's bleach. And when I say my cousin's bleach, it's because everyone was doing it. I knew I could find it somewhere. And it hurt real bad. It was really uncomfortable. And so after a few days, I stopped thinking, I can't continue with this. This is so painful, regardless of the results. And you have to keep up with it, because it's like you going on vacation, getting a tan. Within a couple of weeks, it's gone. You will get rid of those top layers of skin, and then it's gone. And so I wasn't willing to do that for the rest of my life. But then when I got to 16, 17, I wasn't dating. Nobody was really interested. And there were so many comments. I was on a dating website, so many comments about the color of my skin. I just thought, okay, the only way I'm going to be able to date is if I lighten up. And no one's going to see me as desirable if I've got my brown skin. And I was in a town that was really quite racist, and there weren't that many brown people, especially not queer brown people. So there was no way I was going to date unless I looked more Mediterranean, not brown. And so I started bleaching again. And again, it hurt so much. And so I wanted to explore in this documentary why we feel like we have to do this, where this comes from, what kind of treatments are done across the world. Is it just my people? It was so disgustingly eye-opening. We met with people all over the world, from every brown culture, or from every community of color you can imagine. We met with those people. Not everyone made it into this documentary, but everywhere across the world has their version of skin bleaching, has their version of colorism, has their version of making people feel shitty because they're not light enough.
It's interesting. I'm just thinking back. I was a history major, and I'm just thinking back to that in a strange way. It even become within the white community, the fairer skin was seen as more desirable because it meant you didn't work out on the fields, that you had money.
Yeah. Queen Victoria powdered her skin, so it was very clear that she was nobility.
Yeah. It's you really seem to, you just in this conversation, have opened my eyes to it. What do you hope what conversation do you hope the documentary will spur? Because in my opinion, as fucked up as the fashion and beauty industry is with inclusivity, they've really embraced makeup and products for the brown and black community. I mean, I go back and I think about Iman being really the first one to develop a makeup line specifically for black and brown skin. And now it's a norm. And I never think the fashion industry is ahead in anything. I mean, we can get into a deeper conversation about body inclusivity and this, but this seems like the one area that they've almost been ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, they had Naomi Campbell on the cover of Vogue, 25, 30 years ago, probably even longer than that. And so, yes, I do believe that the fashion industry is better than most. However, they still have campaigns for brightening cream. They just changed the name. So yes, they can counterbalance it by having a black model like Naomi on a cover, but they still have campaigns in their magazines for brightening cream. They've stopped calling it bleaching cream because it became too obvious and it became too controversial. That brightening cream is still a bleaching cream. It's doing exactly what a bleaching cream does. So yes, I understand that the fashion community is definitely ahead of the curve. For sure it is. But they still managed to find a way to knock those people of color down. And when it comes to the message or the hope of this documentary, my goal was never to say no one should ever bleach. I'm not ignorant enough to not understand the importance of people having access to skin bleaching cream. For some people, especially in countries outside of the West, they rely on that to be able to get a job. They rely on that to be able to get married. If they don't have that, they probably won't get married. They probably won't get a job. And that's just the way of the world. There's no changing people's mentality within a heartbeat by saying, look, this is causing you people real damage by you thinking that they're less desirable because they're dark skinned. That I can't, none of us can convince them of that. This is generations upon generations upon generations of conditioning. And so for a lot of these people, if we say all bleaching creams, all bleaching products should be banned, we're fucking people over royally.
Right.
And so my goal isn't necessarily to suggest we need to get rid of everything that encourages you to want to lighten your skin. My goal was only ever to make people understand the reason why they believe they're doing it, and to hopefully find strength in themselves to realize they're beautiful without it. They can be successful without it. They need to find a way and really make peace with their own skin tone, because we can't change anybody else's perception of us. But all we can do is try and make peace with who we are and what we have. And so for me, it's still, every now and then, I still have those horrible thoughts about myself, but very few and far between. I got to a point many years ago when I started to really appreciate my skin color. And I'm not saying this to convince myself. I love my skin color. I think my skin color is gorge. When I go on a beach, I'm like, I have the most beautiful skin tone. Glistens beautifully, tans nicely, doesn't age. I mean, I'm 40 and I don't have a wrinkle yet. I'm glad.
Oh God, a gay man's dream.
It's lovely. I'm so grateful for my skin tone. And God, I wish I could have told myself that 20 years ago, saying to myself, you will get there one day where you'll realize just how grateful you should be for this skin. And so that's all I want from this. I want people to understand where this is coming from, why they're thinking the things that they're thinking, and to hopefully encourage them to feel differently about it. And to also hopefully encourage people who are thinking those bad things about people, for them to think, yes, I'm fair-skinned, and maybe let's not be a bitch about those people who aren't fair-skinned. Let's not make them feel bad about it.
So to completely pivot to a shallow topic, which is where I'm always very happy.
Who do I think is the hottest white chick?
Exactly. How did you and your husband meet?
Melissa, I know how basically you are a gay man. Do
Me?
you?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, of course. You must have heard of this website from one of your gays. This was 16 years ago. It got, I don't know if it shut down or it went under or whatever 14 years ago. But there was a website called Connection. It was like the biggest dating website for gay men. Did you ever hear of this?
No, the first one I became very aware of was Grindr.
Oh, okay. Grindr is way later than me. Like that was like I think 10 years ago. I was already in it by that point. And so it's a much younger person's game. So the Connection was basically Facebook for gay men. It was the kind of site where you wouldn't send nudes. You would actually be really inappropriate to send nudes on the likes of Connection. Right. And so it was just a way to
connect.
Make a friend. Yeah, connect, but make a friend. People always understood it's to date. And yeah, you could absolutely date a person or meet a person and just have sex. But it wasn't really for that. It was for men who really wanted to meet somebody and date. And so I was in Utah. I'd made a few gay friends and we would go to the gay bar here. And at that point, I was probably the only person of color that was in that gay bar. And so the boys that they were interested in would gravitate towards me because I was the only thing that looked like no one else. And let me tell you, a British accent gets you a long way in this country, especially in Utah. And so they were getting really frustrated and they said, we're going to put you on this dating website where nobody can hear your stupid accent and they won't fall for your charms. So I was like, okay, fine. And so they put me on this website and the next day, this man called Rob France reached out and said, you don't look like you're from around here. And I meanly replied, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. And apparently that's all he needed to realize I was the one.
That's quite the line.
Yeah. And so he asked me out, and I said, no, I'm not interested in dating. My friends put me on this. I just got done with a breakup. I'm going to be single for 2 years. I'm trying to seek my way across America. I'm not interested.
Which is basically means you're going to get into a relationship whenever you put those
I
parameters.
know, I know, but I was so determined. I was so freshly single, and I was like, I'm done. I just need 2 years of a hoe phase because I'd never had a hoe phase. I was like, I'm going to spend 2 years and then I'll start looking for a date again. Because I was young, I was 24. And and yeah, I just couldn't resist. And so I gave him lunch. I was like, look, we'll go out for lunch and that's it. And we went on our first date, had lunch, and then within the first few minutes, I was like, ah, shit, I really like this guy. And so we kept seeing each other every day, and then we got married a year later.
That's
That's it.
amazing.
We're lesbians.
Okay, so I'm going to be remiss if I don't ask you these questions. What is the
Yeah.
biggest trend you see coming?
I'm hoping we go back to classic wear, just formal wear. I'm so hoping, maybe it's not a trend I see coming, it's a trend I'm hoping will happen, that we just move away from streetwear and stop wanting to look ugly. Like there's so many times I just think you chose to look terrible today. I know you did. Like I know you can see that nothing that you're wearing works together, but you chose it because that's what people are telling you is okay. Can't you just look nice?
Yeah, exactly. So who is your go-to designer?
A couple. I love Gucci always. Isabel Moran, I think, is fantastic. Celine,
Good stuff. I like those too. What's your
yeah.
daily uniform?
If I'm at work, so my daily uniform at home is really simple. I'm in sweats. I've got a toddler and I'm up and down constantly. I'm in sweats. But if I'm out and about, it's a slim jean, not a skinny jean. It's a 501 with a good boot, usually a modern version of a cowboy boot with a couple of inch heel, a leather jacket and a tee. Really classic.
Tan, this has been such a joy. I could talk to you forever. We didn't even get into the Great British Bake Off.
I
Didn't
won.
even
Do you know
get.
this?
I know. I was going to ask you all about how you won, so I'm going to have you back.
You can have me back whenever you want. You're an angel, and I'm so
Oh.
glad to do this.
This is wonderful. Tan, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.